Welcome to the Nourished Brain Podcast, where we focus on mindfulness-based whole foods nutrition and the art of empowered eating to optimize health, mood, energy, and nutritional well-being. I'm Sarah Fajera, an integrative and functionally minded registered dietitian and owner of Mindfully Nourished Solutions. Let's get you nourished. Doug Cook is a registered dietitian and nutritional consultant with over 18 years of experience in a wide variety of settings serving diverse needs. He has a mixed bag with respect to his practice. He has worked as a clinical dietitian at St. Michael's Hospital, St. Joseph's Health Center, and the Center for Addiction and Mental Health in Toronto, Canada. In addition to hospital work and writing, he has a private practice focusing on gut, brain, mental health, and anti-aging nutrition. He practices an integrative and functional approach to nutritional counseling, providing evidence-informed guidance along with the safe use of supplements where appropriate. He is the co-author of Nutrition for Canadians for Dummies, the complete Leaky Gut Health and Diet book, and 175 best superfood blender recipes. Learn more by checking out his website, www.dougcookrd.com. So Doug, welcome. Thank you for joining.
Thank you. I'm really happy to be here. This is exciting.
Yes. So we were just talking before we started recording about some shared interests that we have about this kind of gut-brain connection and food and mood and how powerful, not only the research is, but also what incredible results we see with people that we're working with.
Yeah,
Really
absolutely.
focusing in on these domains. So I'd love for you to just share a little bit about your kind of professional viewpoint and orientation, because it's unique. You're bringing in the integrative and functional piece, and then also some really specific areas of focus that not a lot of dietitians are focusing on. So talk to us about how you got here.
Yeah, well, I consider myself an accidental dietitian because I was fortunate I grew up in the kitchen with my mother and my grandmother. They included me in cooking. I was very comfortable with food prep. My grandmother used to drop these little nuggets of wisdom, like talking about, they sound silly now, but like getting enough roughage, or it's important to have one dark orange and one dark green vegetable every day. And I'm not completely familiar with the history in the U.S. of the food pyramid and now my plate, but the old Canada Food Guide used to have these directional statements, including eating one dark orange and one dark green vegetable. They took it out and they've since brought it back. But I've really just had this knack for science, and I really somehow appreciated the role of nutrition in health, and it just seemed like a perfect marriage to pursue this. So I went back to school to a place where I thought it makes sense to learn, and that's university. I'd never heard of the word dietitian. And then when I got into school, everyone was talking about internship and getting placements in hospitals. So long story short, I kind of fell into that path. I became a dietitian. But it was later that I found this lens through which nutrition can be applied, called functional or integrative and functional nutrition. It really does it drills down into the role that nutrition plays at the cellular level, physiology, the real workings of the body in a way that traditional dietetic education didn't focus on. So that really kind of renewed my interest and reminded me what got me into it in the first place. So here I am today. As you mentioned, I work at this hospital in Canada, the Center for Addiction and Mental Health. It's a psychiatric hospital. There's a lot of nutrition focus on recovery from addictions, but also mental health, and it's just really kind of fueled my interest in that area.
Doug, when you think about the term integrative and functional nutrition as it relates to mental health or mental well-being. What does that term, just in brief, mean to you? How do you explain it to others who ask you?
Yeah, it is, yeah, it's for some reason I sometimes struggle with explaining it, but
Mm.
integrative is not just in the traditional sense that you want to look at a person's situation and look at all the variables that might affect their health. If we're talking about mental health, do they have access to food? Do they have access to shelter? Are they financially insecure? There's for sure that kind of holistic approach, but it's also for me looking at the integration of all the different systems that make up the body and the interrelatedness of that. Medicine is kind of compartmentalized or broken the body down into systems. So we've got the cardiovascular system, the nervous system, the digestive system, the renal endocrine system, and there's specialties in all of that area. And we do kind of work in silos. So forgetting that every single system is basically integrated and interconnected, and how you influence one, either through not feeding it or nourishing it, or medicating it, or it will have a bit of a ripple effect and interconnect other areas. So to me, that's the integrated part. It's really looking at the body as a real integrated system. Neither are discrete or separate.
Mm.
And then functional, really, again, that really looks at how those interconnections all work together. You asked for me a brief definition, and I can't give one. But the digestive tract's a great example. It's not just a system of elimination. There's a muscular component. There's a ecosystem like the microbiota. There's a nerve system. There's the health of the inner lining. There's a whole mucosal layer that we have to think of, and they all work together slash function together for either positively towards health or maybe dysfunctionally towards uh, disease or
Mm-hmm.
dysfunction. So yeah,
Yeah.
maybe that's not too brief.
Yeah, that's a great explanation. I also struggle with it at times because the word I hear a lot is holistic. People say, I'm kind of looking for someone holistic to work with me. And yeah, and trying to just, break it down, and just make sure, we're kind of on the same page that, I'm very much, a dietitian. I'm using food first, right? That's my orientation. But I'm using it to, I say, to try to restore function. That's really what functional is for me, thinking through, where things are a little out of balance and where there's, root causes to health issues or concerns, and trying to address them, like the trunk of the tree, and kind of, yeah, just restore the root system even sometimes, right? To get people
Yep.
kind of back on their feet, and to get things working. So something that came to mind as you were talking, because we're going to talk a lot about just kind of food and mood today, and give people some really great specific ideas that they can use in their kitchens. But is a theory called the triage theory by Bruce Ames. You may have heard of it.
I'm very familiar with it.
Yeah, so I think that would be a great thing to bring in a little bit here, before we dive into to specific foods, because my understanding of the triage theory, in brief, obviously there's a lot to it, but in brief, is that the body has a kind of a multitude of roles that it might partake in with any given nutrient. So we'll talk a little bit about omega-3 and DHA today. So that might be a really good example, where the body would need sufficient omega-3 long chain fatty acids for, in part, for skin integrity, in part for brain health, right, or brain structure, in part for immune system function, in part for the lymphatic system. And so thinking about the triage theory, the theory says that if we don't give our body enough of the given nutrient, it will just revert to the most urgent need. And
Hmm.
so when I think about food and mood, this big topic we'll talk about today, I think oftentimes some of what's happening is that people can feel like they're eating certain foods, right, and getting some of certain nutrients, and they feel like all is well, right? I hear a lot, oh, well, there's no nutrient deficiencies in the US, right? Or, yeah, I
Yeah.
hear kind of those comments like a brush off thing, not recognizing that not only are individual needs different, but sometimes the need for optimal function is far beyond, to fulfill all those roles, is far beyond what might be needed just to prevent deficiency. So, do you have any thoughts on that? Anything to add to that?
Well, to me, I didn't know this for my entire life. I mean, I've been reading nutrition books since I was 16 instead of my other books that I should have been at school. But this is the whole concept for me around the impact nutrition has. So basically, yeah, the triage theory says that the body will triage a shortage of nutrients if it's not getting enough to those uh, needs that ensure short-term survival
Mm-hmm.
rather than long-term, right?
You got it.
So I use this example all the time in my groups at the hospital, but also with my clients, and that's basically I liken it to a budget. So if it costs $2,500 to run your entire uh, to meet all your needs, mortgage, rent, hydro, food, whatever, and you don't have $2,500, you only have 2,000 or 18, you're going to, I hopefully shuffle those towards the things that you need most. You're going to need rent. You're going to need heat. You're not going to need high-speed internet. You're not going to need, the movie channel, that type of thing. So the body's no different. So try to get people to appreciate that. Yeah, you might be getting enough magnesium to keep your heart beating and some basic nerves functioning, but is it not? You're not going to have enough to satisfy the requirements of the brain. So maybe you will have some mood disorders, or you won't have enough to nourish the bones. And yes, 20, 30 years from now, you might have some bone issues or diabetes if we're looking at magnesium's role in insulin function. So yeah, I'm old enough to remember, I don't know what they called it in the US, but in Canada, we used to have clear overt clinical deficiencies.
Mm-hmm.
Then we had optimal intake, and we don't really know what that is. But then we had this whole gray zone that we used to call nutrient insufficiency. And that's really what a potential functional deficiency is. So you're getting
Mm-hmm.
enough magnesium for the basic requirements, but you might not be getting enough for optimal. So there's lots of functional nutrient deficiencies, and that's shows
Mm-hmm.
up in many ways. And then the other thing that we've kind of gotten lax about is if we're eating well for the most part, we follow some kind of food guide or meal food plan, depending on what it's called, and we don't have scurvy or we don't have rickets. We assume nutrition's done its role. Diet's uh, met its goal of preventing deficiency, and now it's medical procedures or medications. So that's well, first of all, it's not true because research has shown that if you optimize the intake of nutrients, that you can get better outcomes. So yeah, I'm not really good at being brief or concise when you ask
No, this is
questions. So
great. Yeah, no, just yeah, build on whatever you feel is relevant and important, because
okay,
that really sets the stage for, what we're going to move into next. We're not just going to highlight foods that you might want to eat every once in a while, but the types of nutrients that we're going to dive into. I mean, we're kind of thinking in terms of this idea of optimal health, optimal mood, optimal well being. And the triage theory plays right into that. Knowing that
absolutely.
for each given person, I like to think of it as an exploration. There's always room to explore what playing around with diet and nutrition therapeutically could help you with, right? How it could benefit you in these ways that sometimes we don't even think about. Mood being
Yeah,
one. So
yeah,
so
absolutely.
yeah, are you ready to dive in? We'll talk
I'm
through
ready.
a
Yeah,
few big ones.
yeah.
So we have really 8 foods that have come to the top of the surface that you're going to talk us through today. And it might be helpful just to focus in a little bit when we're talking specific nutrients, as much as makes sense, to just bring up some of those signs and symptoms of the gray zone, subclinical deficiencies, or place where individuals aren't quite optimal, as well as just frank overt nutrient deficiencies. So if you want to sprinkle some of those in, please feel
Yeah, I'll try.
free.
Yeah.
Please feel free. So yeah, so kick us off. What is really number one on your list of foods that can help to enhance your mood or boost your mood?
Yeah, so I'll just jump in. I just to help people kind of frame this. Like I always tell people that, the brain is an organ like any other organ, and people appreciate, the role of exercise on the heart or the muscles, but we forget that the brain needs TLC as well, right? Like any other body part, it has a structure that needs to be maintained with nutrition, and structure informs function, right? So that includes mood and mental illness and perhaps organic diseases. So the basic stuff that the brain needs that really we can highlight is one of the first things it needs is protein. So of course we can find protein from various sources. There's animal sources, there's eggs, there's fish, chicken, legumes like chickpeas. And the reason, well, proteins are needed for structure, just like muscles, the brain is made up of protein. But the building blocks in neurotransmitters are protein. So we need all these things like tyrosine and all these fancy words that are the neurotransmitters. Um, so one in particular that I like for the brain is our eggs, because egg has an ample supply of protein, but it is also, eggs are a good source of vitamin D, vitamin B12, and a lesser known sibling, I guess you can call it, or a cousin of B vitamins called choline. So choline is really important for making something called acetylcholine, which is a neurotransmitter which helps with learning and mood and memory consolidation. And like Canadians, most Americans are not hitting the mark when when it comes to getting enough choline in the diet. Yeah, I
I
think I'll
think,
pause.
yeah, that just thanks to that fear of eggs. That's the case here
Yeah,
in the US. Yeah, choline intake is pretty much across the board insufficient. And even right in pregnancy, that's where it's so super important. And the majority of pregnant women are not meeting choline needs.
yeah, for sure.
So yeah, and some of the really good sources of choline, we can just throw out a couple, would be eggs, like you said, soy products.
Yeah,
Those have some choline.
soybeans. There's fish. There's lots of good sources of vegetarian sources of choline. It's not just about eggs and fish. Um, those are easily found for sure online. You can just Google that. But just to help people out a bit, beef liver is good, chicken liver is good, even wheat germ has a lot of it.
Yeah,
Fish, as we mentioned,
yeah.
Brussels sprouts is good. So it is relatively abundant, assuming buying groceries, etc., is not a problem. And like most of us, it's just consistency, right? So if you're running out the door and you're not eating breakfast, you're grabbing coffee and a muffin, um, or a coffee and a Danish. I know that's kind of the stereotype of the American breakfast. Having been to Florida many times growing up, uh, so you can't obviously can't make it meet that mark if you're kind of eating on the run and that kind of stuff. So we just
Sure.
miss the mark if you're lack of consistency.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, so when you think about protein, you had mentioned that protein in and of itself is pretty important to brain health, in part because of the amino acid building blocks, right? And yeah, and what the body does with it. So, have some food sources there. Just a note about choline, and we can probably just include a list of choline-rich foods right at the bottom of this. We'll just kind of keep track as we go, and we can give people some additional resources to click through with.
Okay.
Anything else that you'd mention about protein? Just the importance for well-being. I always think about Yeah, so in addition to neurotransmitter function, blood sugar balance too with protein, just having to do with mood. Any thoughts about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So the maintaining obviously a balanced blood sugar is good because not so much in my outpatient, but or my private practice, but in the areas and addictions where I work, I really talk about the impact of blood sugar balance because if it goes too low, one of the defenses that the body has is it will pump out a little bit of adrenaline from the adrenal glands, which is fine because it gives you that kind of staying power till you can get to your next meal or snack. But one of the side effects of a little bit of too elevated adrenaline is this agitation and irritation and kind of a false sense of anxiety just because that's that
Mm.
fight or flight neurotransmitter. So you kind of get that edginess.
Mm.
The word now is hangry. I don't know if there's all these commercials in the US with this the chocolate bar and it's true
Yes.
because you right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm just laughing because for a short period of time, I ran a food and mood class at a place I had worked, and so the individual that I ran the group with was a clinical licensed clinical social worker, and she would always refer to the Snickers commercial.
Yeah.
Talk about how we talked a lot about sugar, so she would bring that up constantly, how someone would go from being a monster and then eat their Snickers. And I don't know, I don't think I've seen the commercial, but I'm laughing because she loves that
I've seen it, and
example.
I don't know why I don't like that word. I just sometimes I don't like made up words, but that's my own issue, hangry. So
Hangry. Yep, yep.
now, what I use in the addiction model, and it applies to everybody, but in the addiction model, if you're kind of edgy like that, it can be a trigger to use. And so
Yeah.
what I tell them, but I would also tell it to anybody sitting in front of me who might be concerned about the impact, is that if it's been several hours and they haven't eaten and they're getting a bit edgy, and all they have in front of them is a cookie or something that might be deemed quote unhealthy, like something that has maybe a lot of sugar, versus nothing, I would tell them to have that. If
Mm.
it's half a candy bar, if it's some jujubes or jujubes, however you pronounce it, as soon as you get that sugar, it shuts off the alarm system. The adrenals stop pumping out adrenaline, the adrenaline drops, and it just gives you that little bit of time to get to your next meal. You don't want to build your meal around that, but if you've got nothing
Mm.
and you have access to that, that'll just really improve your mood because your eye can get tunnel vision. It almost feels like my peripheral's gone. You get edgy, you get moody, you get tired, your
Mm.
concentration drops. So if they haven't done a little prep and have some nuts and an apple with them or something like that,
Mm.
I would argue that it'd be better than walking around in that. It really is an alarm state.
Mm.
Um, but if you're eating a complete meal, as we say, the kind of golden trio is that protein, carb with some fiber and fat that will help to balance the blood sugar to kind of bring it back to that point you made.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. I'm glad you related it back to addiction because yeah, how many forms can addiction take? So
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah, that's for sure.
can apply for many,
But nobody likes to be hangry.
so to speak.
Yeah.
Oh, Doug, what is the second food on your list?
So I'm going to say fatty fish. Fatty fish can include, I know a lot of people are worried about fish stocks and stuff, but it can be, sustainable foods like sardines. But fatty fish, the evidence is still uh, basically robust and conclusive that fatty fish getting more fish is good for overall health, but it brings in the omega 3s, these long chain omega 3s. Some people may have heard of the acronyms EPA and DHA if they've ever looked at a fish oil supplement or maybe some omega 3 fortified eggs. Uh, Fish has a ton of things beyond those fats like vitamin D, B12, zinc, selenium. If you're eating fish with bones like sardines, you're going to get calcium, magnesium, pretty much every vitamin mineral is needed by the brain. But what's great about the omega 3s is I remind people that the brain dry weight is about 60% fat. So the quality of the fat in our diet influences the fat in the brain. In a perfect world, depending on the study that you read, 10, 15, up to 20% of that fat would ideally be omega 3s. So I think the intake studies of what people are eating is pretty much the same for both countries, and we're largely, like, hugely missing the mark. So again, DHA, I like to kind of make it out to be that structural fat. It really helps to build the myelin and make the neurons nice. I went to a conference and they were talking about brains on autopsy, and they're talking about healthy neurons versus unhealthy neurons, and the neurologist was saying, oh, the healthy neurons are, when we when we do an autopsy, they're big, fat, and juicy. They're just like these night crawlers, these worms that
Mm.
people use to go fishing with, and you really do want them enriched with that DHA. And they also, the EPA, which is another type, helps to increase blood flow. So you're getting lots of good nutrients and oxygen to the brain. They both quell or dampen inflammation, and depression is kind of moving towards this being seen as a disorder of inflammation, not this kind of simplistic model of being low in one particular neurotransmitter. So they're needed for structure, they're needed for function, and most of us don't get enough. And then if people are regular alcohol consumers, I'm not putting any judgment on that, but alcohol can deplete kind of both magnesium and DHA from the brain. So it's important to get more of those.
You mentioned inflammation as something that EPA targets, and you also mentioned a connection to mental health or depression. So just to add to that point, I think the distinction here is really between acute emergency type inflammation, where someone might have a physical emergency, perhaps cuts themselves or has some kind of trauma where there's inflammation, right? And the immune system rushes to the defense and tries to address whatever the trauma is, or the cut or bruise, whatever it might be. So, there's that form of inflammation. But I think the type of inflammation you're talking about is really a chronic low grade inflammation, the type that's, been tied back to not only depression, but also a lot of our chronic diseases, right? Diabetes, type 2 diabetes, and rheumatoid arthritis, just to name a couple, where you're thinking about kind of your ability to modulate inflammation and your immune system also. They're related. They have lots of overlap, right? As
Yep.
being out of whack. So yeah, knowing that EPA helps to come along and just put the troops in order, kind
Yeah,
of,
that's a good way of putting it.
right? Is yeah, it's a little bit of an indirect connection, but that chronic low grade inflammation, my goodness, is I think one example of just thinking about this integrative and functional model about how addressing one thing, even putting your focus on your body's ability to modulate inflammation and removing triggers for inflammation, can help to address a range of physical and mental imbalances.
Yeah, bang on. Yep, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's exactly why when you look at the literature and the studies that there's obviously a psychological impact of having a chronic disease. Um, so there's that aspect of it, but then there's also the overlap, right? As you said, like that connection. So if people have chronic disease that's driving inflammation, then there's good evidence that that will affect the mood by virtue of the inflammation, not just the impact of having arthritis or some disease on their
Mm.
quality of life. So, and you can experimentally induce it. You can induce inflammation through various chemicals, interferon, these different things, and then depression just goes up, even though there's nothing else going on except for this chemical infusion. It's just to prove a point.
Yeah.
And then when that is resolved, the mood improves. So yeah, there really is that connection.
It's super interesting stuff. Yeah, so I guess with the fish, the other thing that feels important to bring up is that it's a, gosh, pretty darn strong component of a traditional Mediterranean diet, which is cornerstone to, the Smiles trial. I just put out a podcast episode about that, how this modified Mediterranean diet, really the first of its kind applied to nutritional psychiatry, the Smiles diet, resulted in significant decreases in depression and anxiety. So the fish itself, right? There's these mechanisms there, and then we also have this bigger dietary pattern that brings in the fatty fish that we've seen actually help with mood measurably, based
Hmm.
off of accepted scoring tools. So,
Yeah, no, it's great. And then for proof of concept, everybody likes that RCT, and there is really good, robust studies that have shown uh, using targeted supplementation, because people like to control dose and to have that those variables controlled, does have a benefit. And like EPA specifically, it seems to act like monoamine antidepressants, like amitriptyline and that type of stuff. And when you burrow down into the physiology, the functional aspect that keeps coming back to functional is, it really does help to regulate the balance. Like you said, there's no such thing as good or bad information. It's just about balance. And when you look at neurons and nerve tissue, it's excitatory or inhibitory, right? So nerves impulses are either, going through, which is what happens when you excite a neuron, or they're being inhibited. And so EPA really does help to stop the overstimulation, like these antidepressants. So it's like a low dose antidepressant. No one's suggesting that they replace drugs or anything like that, but there is a legitimate functional component of these things on the physiology of the body.
okay, are we going to talk about chocolate next by chance?
Yes,
Oh,
yes.
good. All right, lead us on.
Yeah, there's a lot of controversy about whether it's good or bad, and the dose and that kind of stuff. But chocolate will lift your mood in a very great way, because we eat because it's pleasurable, right? There's this concept of the hedonic properties of food. It makes us feel good. That's why it's rewarding. And when we do things that are pleasurable, dopamine is raised, serotonin is raised, etc. But there is caffeine, a small amount of caffeine in chocolate, and then a cousin, if you will, of caffeine, theobromine. And one of the ways and we'll talk about another um, food, I believe, is on the list. There's a source of caffeine. It modestly raises dopamine and norepinephrine and serotonin, those three main neurotransmitters that are talked a lot about in mental health, because we have drugs that work on their metabolism, even though there are dozens and dozens and dozens of neurotransmitters. But there's nothing wrong with that. So you have a cup of coffee, if you're a coffee drinker, or you drink chocolate, you get that nice mild rise and dopamine, and it feels good. It feels good because it tastes good, and it feels good because it does have a physiological impact. And then I remember doing a radio interview years ago, looking at the legitimacy, if there's any kind of um, connection between, or why chocolate is associated with Valentine's Day and romance and all that kind of stuff. So there is supposedly a chemical in chocolate called phenylethylamine, which is produced by the brain in association with with people that we love, or animals and that kind of stuff, which then reinforces that connection, right? So there is a legitimate kind of reason why that stuff has persisted in our culture and our I'm not sure what the word is when we talk about psychology or
Yeah,
sociology.
yeah.
But yeah, dark chocolate does have that impact for sure.
Do you have a suggestion or recommendation for percentage? Of course, the higher it gets, the more bitter.
Yeah, the higher it gets, the more bitter. I'm a 90% person, but I know if you look at the breakdown, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but even 50 to 72, you'll get a really appreciable amount of these cocoa polyphenols that are good for arteries. That long term is going to help your brain and therefore your mood in terms of being neuroprotective. Um, but Yeah, I would say, at least 72. Most people can handle that. It's got just a little touch of sweetness typically to help the medicine go down. So there's nothing wrong with that. It's not. Yeah, it's not. It's not. It's not like it's a perhaps a cheaper quality chocolate. So I'm happy with that. I like it bitter, but not everybody does.
I've got some cacao powder
Mm.
most of the time in my cabinets, and it's pretty darn amazing how if I put that in a smoothie or make like a coconut oil fudge or something with it, how much different I feel. Not only can I feel the caffeine lift, similarly to drinking a little bit of coffee, but mood too. Like I maybe it's just that I have the information in my head that it should help with mood, but I really do think I feel it. I really really sincerely do, especially kind of right to the source like that.
Yeah, and it's very subtle, right? It doesn't have to
Yeah.
be a real hit to have that kind of that lift.
Yeah.
And there's a reason why coffee, you know, reasonable coffee consumption is associated with lower rates of depression, and it's assumed that it's within this area of just helping to give a bit of a lift with these neurotransmitters.
So we'll
Mm.
talk coffee in a minute. What
Yeah.
would be the next on your list? What's
So
next,
another
baby?
good food would be oysters.
Oysters.
Oysters are pretty abundant. They're easily farmed. They're inexpensive, and I think they're the richest source of zinc. I think a 3.5 ounce or 100 gram container's got about 70 milligrams of zinc. And zinc is pretty amazing because whereas it's like it and magnesium is kind of like the original multitaskers. So zinc has about 250 roles in the body in terms of uh, supporting or conducting or whatever analogy works for you, these different chemical reactions that run the body. So if we're not getting enough zinc, you can be sure that not all 250 of those reactions are getting what they need. That's this triage aspect. But interestingly, unlike magnesium and phosphorus and calcium, which is stored in the bone, we don't have a reliable storage of zinc in the body. So we do need a steady supply throughout the day. And so zinc has been shown to help alleviate depression, both in terms of eating more zinc-rich foods, and then for those who really like that gold standard for proof of concepts, zinc supplement studies have been shown to help with depression as well. So it's really good. It works kind of in the neuron and helps to basically prevent overexcitation. Like people have heard of glutamate probably and calcium channels. So when these get overstimulated or they're not kind of kept in check, that's when you can get problems with mood, etc. So zinc helps to kind of orchestrate that in a very, um, like in a more kind of organized manner, if you will. Yeah.
Yeah, yep. And glutamate is really the major excitatory neurotransmitter. Is that how
Hmm.
you describe it as well?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So
Yeah,
yeah,
and then
zinc is
zinc, it helps
yeah.
it helps the body deal with stress, and then stress has been shown to increase excretion. So it becomes like one of these vicious circles. So getting more zinc is good. I like smoked oysters. I'm not a big fan of the raw,
Oh.
but I've appreciated raw oysters. I've had a couple that are quite good, but I do like that smoky flavor.
I've always had a hard time with oysters. That, oysters and liver kind of on my
Yeah.
list. I keep trying. I keep trying. But zinc is one of the reasons for me that I've really been intentional about bringing red meat, higher quality red meat, pastured when I can, into my diet, on a regular basis, where for a while I stayed far away from it. I think, to be really honest with you, during conventional nutrition and dietetics training, because I thought it was
Mhm.
not so good. But after reading a lot of this mood research and thinking about some of the mechanisms, even to your point about glutamate, you think about a condition like OCD, That's one of my big interests. When you think about OCD, we know that genetically there seems to be a predisposition to a kind of a dysregulation of the glutaminergic system. So glutamate is not firing correctly. It's almost like there's too much available, like the brain is too excited. And then you have these, it's not just that, but you have these obsessive compulsive behaviors that accompany that dysfunction. So I think about zinc and even attention and focus, as well as mood and thought processing. And yeah, just to share a little bit about my own decision around that, because I recognized for myself I was not getting enough, and I was like, whoa. All right, so I can't do liver quite yet, working on it, but yeah, including a little more red meat might be the way to go for me. So
Yeah, and I keep kind of focusing on mood, but you're right. It's just there's mood disorders, there's other mental health manifestations. So it's not just about anxiety and depression. It's everything, like you said, the OCD or other types of mental health. But there's a lot of good sources. I mean, yeah, there's liver. Liver's tough for me. I can only eat it as
oh,
liverwurst. But
i'm,
there's
I'm
red
glad it's not
meat.
me.
There's
Just
turkey.
me.
Pumpkin seeds are
Pumpkin
great
seeds, yes.
source. Tempeh. And people may have heard stuff around whether or not the nutrients in plants are absorbed as well. But if you're eating, I know if you're eating a mixed diet, that these things all work synergistically to enhance each other's absorption. So lots of ways to get zinc.
Yeah, good stuff. Good stuff. Okay, so we've talked all things oysters, so
Mhm.
coffee.
Coffee, yeah,
Yay.
coffee, like the chocolate, raises dopamine and this other neurotransmitter, norepinephrine or noradrenaline, really well. It elevates mood. It's associated with lower rates of depression, as I've mentioned. Um, some people kind of have these ideas that, a little bit of coffee craving or a little bit of coffee is, to make it sound like a strong addiction or there's this crash. And I mean, I don't like that kind of hyperbole. There's nothing wrong. There's no evidence really to show that a few cups a day is problematic. And I'm always open minded. So if anyone can produce some good quality research, I will happily change my mind if that's not true, that it is a problem. But there is a caveat because what people don't realize is that it only takes a couple hundred milligrams or so a day, maybe two or three, back when I remember coffee when it was 6 ounces, 8 ounces. You go to a diner, you get that clunky mug. That's a cup of
Hmm.
coffee, not these 20-ounce
Yeah.
things. So once you have more than a couple hundred to 300 milligrams, caffeine's really done its job to kind of bind to those sites on the nervous system to block adenosine. So
Mm-hmm.
adenosine is this molecule that builds up throughout the day that prepares us for sleep. So what caffeine and adenosine are so structurally similar that caffeine kind of nudges out the adenosine. It's an issue of real estate. But once that's happened and people are kind of pounding back the coffee and they're kind of looking for that buzz or they think they're getting that energy, it's just adrenaline. So the adrenal glands
Mm.
start pumping out the adrenaline. Um, and if a couple of cups is not working, then you have to look at other things. You got to look at maybe
Mm.
sleep, or if it's really something that's zapping your energy, you may need to obviously need to go to the doctor. It could be thyroid, it could be iron, it could be something else. But that's kind of hard for people to appreciate that just a little goes a long way.
Mm-hmm.
And then anything they're quote chasing is really it's adrenaline, and that's you don't want the nervous system being that kind of chronic state of stimulation. So
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if it works for people. No one's told me that it doesn't work for them. But the analogy I say, it's like you don't want to have a car in neutral where you're kind of just revving the engine, right? So that's kind of how I think of too much coffee
Mm-hmm.
and the impact of too much adrenaline as a consequence of that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's really, really well said. I think there's a distinction between using coffee for a little bit of a lift, for the benefits you described, as well as the phytonutrients and the bitterness and all of that, and using coffee to treat an energy crisis,
Hmm.
which could
Or to
result
manage a
from,
lifestyle if you're not getting enough sleep. And
yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
for sure.
So, what is next on our big list here of 8 foods to boost mood?
So I'm going to focus on legumes,
Okay.
which I think most people know that word. Chickpeas, lentils, dried peas, and beans. They're great sources of folate, and they do have some B12 and B6. So folate is an important nutrient for mood, but it helps to keep something down, something called homocysteine. It's a normal thing that we all have in our body. It's just part of protein metabolism and all that stuff. But if it gets too high, it does drive inflammation. So we need adequate amounts of folate and B12, and B6 really is a helper with those other two vitamins to keep homocysteine levels down. Um, and what's interesting about legumes and liver, it comes back to liver, is that the folate in those two foods is very stable. So we often think of leafy greens, asparagus, all those types of foods, dark lettuces as being source of folate, and they are, but it's you can lose a lot of it. By the time you chop it up and you rinse them, you put them in the salad spinner and you dry it, you do lose a lot of folate. So, but in liver and legumes, even though they're dry, the folate's very stable. So they're good for a whole bunch of stuff: protein, fiber, potassium. But they're a good source of shelf-stable folate. So yeah, they're easy to include. I think they're gaining popularity. It's not just vegetarians that eat them. You can put them in smoothies. You can put them in meatloaf. You can put them cold on a salad. You can mix them with anything. They take up the flavor of any vegetable, and they're very versatile.
And affordable.
Oh yeah,
You know?
very affordable.
Yeah, if you're thinking about even the budget analogy, right? Thinking about your caloric need or your nutrient need, trying to figure out how to really get in as many nutrients as possible. Yeah, I mean beans, legumes prepared well can be, I think, one of the best ways. They're just so darn cheap.
Yeah, and they are neutral. I would challenge or encourage anybody just to try like a quarter cup in a smoothie, like spinach or a little bit of pumpkin. Most people will not notice it. So easy way to sneak it in.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Obviously, the concern oftentimes is with digestion. So we can, I think, probably put a little link below. Again, I'll make myself a note about, yeah, how to cut down on some of that, some different ways to prepare beans to make
Hmm.
them easier to digest. Because not everybody can just open a can and dump them. Some people need it prepared, yeah, for longer periods of time, right? And that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. It can take a little while for your body to adjust if you're not used to eating beans or legumes.
Yeah, that's yeah, there's no quick fix. You're in it for the long run and the long game, as they say.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so good. So pulses, chickpeas, lentils, all of that. Lots and lots of options to integrate those in.
Mhm.
What would be next on your list?
Your favorite liver?
My favorite in my
Uh,
freezer for months.
yeah, I can't. Yeah, I can eat it as liverwurst. But it's yeah, it's when you talk about superfoods, I know that's a tricky word, but it really is an
Mm,
overlooked, relatively inexpensive food that's super rich in choline, B12 for sure. All of us animals store B12 in our liver, and it's got a good source of iron as well. So a lot of people, I don't know if they really think about iron and mood and brain health, but it absolutely first of all, if you're not getting enough oxygen, you're going to feel tired and moody and
yeah.
fatigued, etc. But like at other body parts, other cells, iron's needed by the neurons for energy production, and it helps with monoamine metabolism, those neurotransmitters, serotonin, dopamine, noradrenaline. And yeah, in deficiencies, it's all those diffuse symptoms that are hard to pin down, and people might not think of it if they're just feeling fatigued or irritable. A lot of overlap with depression, brain fog. I know a lot of people in the dietitian world or kind of the mainstream world, if I'm can use that word don't like the word brain fog. They think it's a bit too alternative or woo woo, whatever the word is. But I think it's a perfectly great way to describe that fuzziness, haziness, lack of clarity. And like, what else do you call it, right? I
Right,
just, I
exactly. It
feel
it
cloudy. I
represents
feel
the,
fuzzy.
yep, agree. It
People will
represents the
say, I got to get the
experience.
cobwebs out of my head. Well, that's
Yeah.
brain fog. And
Yeah.
so it could be, you know, brain not getting enough oxygen. It could be some other stuff that we won't go into for the purposes of this podcast, but maybe there's some inflammation in the gut. Maybe there's a bit of translocation of these bacterial byproducts. So I love the word. I just, it's the word that people use. And so I will just continue to qualify it and
Mm.
get people to think about it. So liver is good for that, iron, B12, and choline.
Okay, fantastic. So we'll keep working on that, on the liver
Yeah.
thing, right? Okay, so that was number 7. So we have one more food here to feature. So what could it be that will round us off here tonight?
The food is Brazil nuts.
Brazil
So I think
nuts.
everyone's heard of Brazil nuts. They they're great for selenium. A lot of people may or may not know that. Selenium is a mineral, just like zinc or magnesium, which is needed for a couple of things. It's one of the key minerals in something called glutathione, which plays a it's both an antioxidant, but it's also the master detoxifier. So there's a lot of it found in the brain, in the I think it's the cerebral cortex, the front part of the brain, but it is a primary antioxidant in the brain. And antioxidants, the way I describe it to people who don't understand all that is I just say, think of rust proofing, right? You're making a salad, you put some lime juice on the avocado or some lemon juice on the apple to prevent it from browning.
Mm.
Antioxidants kind of basically help to rust proof various parts of our body.
Hmm.
So if there's oxidation or rusting, you're going to get some inflammation. And again, it's low selenium is linked with depression. Again, probably that whole inflammation model. But glutathione also helps to protect against some of the effects of mood stabilizing drugs. If anyone happens to be on the drugs that are used for bipolar, who might be listening, like lithium and valproate. So it works together with those medications. And then the other thing that selenium does, it's really important and needed and vital for the conversion of the inactive thyroid hormone into the active form. And when you look at low functioning thyroid activity or maybe low levels of levels of active thyroid hormone, it's basically all the stuff that we talk about. It's like
Mm.
fatigue, irritability, just lack of energy. So Brazil nuts are a great way to kind of get that selenium in. They're a little pricey, and you don't have to eat a lot of them. So even if you had a few a week, just to kind of top up what you're probably getting in your diet, it's a really easy way to kind of fill the tank.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, beautiful. And we can include, yeah, some more ideas for selenium-rich foods too to
Mm.
complement if cost is a concern for sure. Okay, so in summary here, so we have got, wow, all this great stuff. So from protein-rich foods to fatty fish featuring the DHA and the EPA, thinking about dark chocolate, oysters, coffee, pulses, legumes, liver, Brazil nuts. These are all things that can be integrated on a regular basis, right? I mean, this is just such a beautiful example of how the biochemistry can be really so fascinating and so interesting. You could just get lost in it. But really, it comes back down to whole fresh foods, right? Good foods that are around us, are around in our environments and our grocery stores. And yeah, you've done a beautiful job just highlighting the benefits that are often unappreciated and often gone unseen. And I'm hoping that someone listening can take a couple of these ideas and start to build them in and use it as a bit of an experiment for themselves and see what changes.
Yeah, no, it's when you lay it out like that, when you just summarize the list, it's just food.
It's
It's
just
and that's what's
food.
so amazing about it. And it sounds delicious. You're right, like writing off this list, and I'm thinking this is all sounds like great. And again, it's really where we're missing the mark is just being a little consistent in those choices. So
Mm.
we're all um, I'm not guilty. That's not the word, but we're all affected by modern living, eating on the run,
Mm.
being overscheduled. So we're all in the same boat, and I just think if people maybe hear it in this way and realize it's just food and how important it is, it might be able to help them, just kind of make a bit of a shift towards some of those choices.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So, Doug, in summary, as you think through the ramifications of the positive ramifications of all of this that we've talked through today, what are your big takeaways? What are your kind of closing comments or recommendations for people who are really wanting to harness some of this information?
Takeaways, I guess I kind of go back to the way I always start, convert my groups and that type of thing. And I just remind people that at the end of the day, this may sound a little not very exciting, but we're biological beings and we're made up of nutrients. We get those nutrients from food, and that you cannot be your best psychological, emotional, or spiritual health unless you kind of get to the foundational aspect of that biological need of the brain, and that's nutrients that we get from food, and that this really does impact structure, and structure influences function. And a lot of the people I work with are taking medications for various reasons, not the least of which is mental health issues and mood issues. And I just remind them that there's a time and place for medication. I'm not anti-medication, but I remind them, and this is based on good research, that you can't out-medicate a nutrient deficiency or a nutrient insufficiency,
Mm.
because the medication has to work with the biology, and
Mm-hmm.
so they really do work in tandem, and you can get better results when you kind of take into account that foundational base, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Doug, where can people find more of your work and your articles? You have a blog, right?
Yeah,
Um,
I have a
yeah.
blog, so it's on the website as you mentioned. It's dougcookrd.com. Doug Cook RD is also the I guess the word is profile. I should know this. It's the for Instagram, Twitter,
Mm,
and
mm-hmm.
Facebook. It's all Doug Cook RD. So everything's all the same under one roof, if you will. So yeah, I would love for people to check me out, and feel free to send comments through those various platforms. And yeah, I would like to hear that.
Yeah, great. Yeah, Doug and I would both love to hear feedback and thoughts, and you can find more of his work and his kind of what he's reading about and interested in over at his website. So we'll also post that. So Doug, thank you again. So grateful for your time, and you've clearly invested so much energy into yeah, bringing this perspective into your professional work, and so it's so important. I think so needed. So lots of appreciation for that. And thank you for sharing.
You're very welcome. It's been great to be on, and I think that people are really hungry for this. So thank you for the opportunity.
You're so welcome. You're so welcome. Sarah here, owner of Mindfully Nourished Solutions. It's my goal with this podcast to explore strategies for empowered and well-informed food and eating decisions. If this information has been supportive to you, please head over to iTunes to rate this episode and to leave a review about what was most helpful. To learn more about how food is impacting the way you feel, on a day-to-day basis, head over to my website at mindfullynourishedSolutions.com for a copy of my free food mood journal. See you next time.